In this video, we're going to discuss a key aspect of editing a text: auditing your text for words and sentences that make it more difficult to read. Now this sounds very simple, but it can improve your text a lot. Isn't that what we all like? Quick fixes that you can apply immediately? Well, let's dive into it then. The rule of thumb is quite simple. The longer the word, sentence or paragraph, the more difficult it is to read. This doesn't always apply, but generally follow this rule and you'll be good to go. And make no mistake, we use difficult words when simpler ones are available so often. As I was writing this script, in fact, I first wrote, utilize difficult words when simpler alternatives are available very frequently. And then I thought, oh wow, now I'm doing it myself. Utilize means the same thing as use. I can say ones instead of alternatives, and often means exactly the same as frequently. So instead of utilize difficult words when simpler alternatives are available very frequently, I'm saying use difficult words when simpler ones are available so often. It's just easier, isn't it? And this is just one example, but I do this all the time. And that's a key point as well. Sure, one difficult sentence isn't going to drive your visitors away, but these things tend to snowball. With every difficult word and sentence you write, your text becomes just a little bit more difficult to read. And it goes the other way as well. Any way you can make your text easier to read without hurting your message will help. It's not about dumbing down your text, it's about making your message available and accessible to more people. So the way you do this is simply by going through your text and asking yourself, can I word this differently? Can I make this sentence easier to read by choosing easier words that mean the same thing? Okay, so I gave you an example of difficult words, but the same principle applies to sentences. Long sentences can be a pain to read, especially if there's a lot of them in one piece. Again, using a long sentence here or there is not the end of the world. It's actually great. Texts that only have short sentences are often an absolute bore to read. You have to mix it up. Keep your readers on their toes. Just try not to go over 20 words too often. Reading long sentences requires a lot of energy, and it's often unnecessary. Long sentences are often caused by one problem. Many writers tend to put too much information in one sentence. Just because thoughts are related doesn't mean they should all be in the same sentence. Consider each separate idea within a sentence and break up your sentence into a few shorter ones. Then connect the sentences using transition words. I'll give you an example of a very long sentence. Although it can be a challenge to write shorter sentences, it's really important to do so because it makes your sentence easier to read, even if it requires a little more effort. Okay, so now let's try to break it up into shortened sentences. It can be a challenge to write shortened sentences. Still, it's really important to make an effort to do so. After all, it makes your sentences easier to read. It'll be worth your while. So, in short, check your text for sentences that are too long. If more than, say, a quarter of your sentences is longer than 20 words, you can probably do better. Cut a 25-word sentence up into 2 or 3 shorter sentences, and this will go a long way in making your reader's experience a little bit smoother. There's one big risk that you should avoid. Some people tend to write what we call fragments when rewriting long sentences into a few shorter ones. A fragment is an incomplete sentence. For example, don't write, when we were working on our copy, full stop. We rewrote sentences to make them shorter. Now this sentence isn't grammatically correct because the first sentence isn't a sentence on its own. It's actually a dependent clause to the second sentence. We're going to give you some more examples of dependent clauses in the reading materials. Another type of fragment is one where a sentence doesn't have a verb that corresponds to its subject, like the second sentence in this example. One of the risks you can run into is that you start writing fragments, full stop. A mistake people often make when trying to make their long sentences shorter. Now, a mistake is a subject that needs a verb. Is in this case, but it's not there. When you're rewriting longer sentences into shorter ones, always make sure your sentences are independent clauses, unless you're making a conscious, stylistic choice. And remember, don't apply everything I've said too extremely. Don't use the same word 8 times just because it's simple. Do not write 7-word sentences exclusively. You want your text to be fun to read, so by all means mix things up if it improves your texts. And if a more difficult word better describes what you're trying to say, go for it. But all things being equal, always make the easiest option your first choice. You'll notice the results, and so will your readers.